learn about water. It is critically important. We're trying to get the word out to make sure that legislators and other interested people, whether or not you're on the Agriculture, Water, and Natural Resources Committee in either chamber, this is a topic of importance to all Coloradans. And so thank you again, even those behind the pole. My name is Karen McCormick. I'm State House Representative from District 11, which is the city of Longmont. And we are so thankful for Water Education Colorado, the CWCB, our Colorado Water Conservation Board, as well as all the members of Colorado Water Congress, of which there are hundreds of members, to participate and collaborate together on these kind of lunch and learn sessions. So I will turn it over to whoever's gonna, maybe it's Janae, or you? I'm first, gonna go first. But thank you again so much, and please tell your friends and neighbors to come to the next one. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I'll keep this short and sweet so that we can get into the meat of why we are here. My name is Chania Polo. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Water Congress, and I just want to say that we started this tradition with Water Education Colorado a couple of years ago. Water, as Representative McCormick said, is an incredibly important resource in our state, and there's no such thing as too much information and understanding when it comes to water and what's going on and some of the issues and priorities that we're facing. So we're kicking it off in 2025 with this workshop. We're hoping to have a few more, and just thank you all of you for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juan Perez-Saez. I am the Executive Director for Water Education Colorado. I'm going to keep it super short. I just started last fall, so I want to make sure you all know me. We were created in 2002 after a big drought in the state of Colorado, and our mission is to ensure that all Coloradans have the right information and we can make informed decisions about sustainable water future of the state. We were created by a statute, and we are nonpartisan, non-advocacy, and we just make sure that everybody has all the facts that we need in order to ensure that our state has a sustainable water future. Thank you so much. I do have a business card that I'm going to put in the back table. If any of you want to have my contact information, feel free to take it and reach out afterwards. The point here is not for you to memorize every piece of information, but to know that there's 3 amazing organizations who can provide you with those facts in the future. Thank you so much.
Okay, and I am Lauren Ress. I'm the Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, which is a state agency in the Colorado Department of Natural Resources. And today you're going to be hearing from 3 members of my team. Kirk Russell, who is our finance section chief. He's in charge of our loan program that we operate in the CWCB. Janine Shaw, who runs our grant section, which is a fairly newly created section that houses 2 of our main showcase grant programs. And then also Nate Pearson, who works for the Department of Natural Resources as the assistant director for water. So we're going to be on the program today, but as Chene mentioned, there will be a couple of other workshops, dates TBD. But thank you all for coming to this one, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So take it away, Kirk.
Thank you. I get a little bit excited when I get to talk about the CWCB loan program, and it's evident by the volume of slides that I put in there. And when I did the test run, it was about 30 minutes. So I'm going to do my best to bring that down. My name is Kirk Russell. I'm the finance section chief, and I'm going to have Janine flip these slides, and I think this will help me move through this a little bit quicker. You're certainly welcome to the slide deck if there's something that I'm moving through too fast with. So the loan program's been around since 1971, and we celebrated 50 years a couple years ago. Severance tax was introduced into the program in 96, and we advertise that we do about $40 to $60 million in new loans each year. And that's to just give a relative idea when folks come in and say we got a $3 billion project. We might be able to help a little, but we can't take care of all of your project. So I like this timeline. Gives you a reference of the history of CWCB, and or the loan program. I want to do this because I think it'll help lay the groundwork of the topic of the severance tax perpetual base fund. So you can see across the top the years, the decades, and then in the middle there, those are the size of loans that CWCB used to be required to come to the legislature and ask for approval of each loan every time. So as we progressed into the 2000s, that increased to the current limit of $10 million. So the CWCB board approves a loan under 10. Anything over 10, we will be putting in the projects bill and introducing to the sponsors each year, and there will be one in this year's projects bill. You can see across the bottom some of the highlighted items I'd like to trigger there. That you see 1995, the severance tax was introduced into the loan program, and then in 02, CWCB's operational activities were removed from the general fund, and so it's all cash funded out of this program, the interest earnings and the revenue coming from elsewhere. You can see the WSRF, which is the Basin Roundtable efforts, started in 2005, requiring some grant funding that we've used the loan program to supplement. We'll ignore that 2009 $170 million general fund transfer at this time. And you see the water plan grant was put in, or the water plan was accepted, I want to say in 17 or 15, and we started looking at grants for water plan grants. And the loan program was instrumental in providing water plan grant funding before Prop G came around. So that's kind of taken some of the burden off of the earnings and efforts out of the loan program. One of the things we tout in the loan program is the low interest rate. We subsidize the rate. We base it on the municipal A-rated bond, and then we cut that in half. We take an average over 6 months, and we cut that in half, and you see the ag rate of 2%. We really try to push this loan program into those mutual ditch companies that have agricultural components, and then you can see the municipal rates are relatively favorable too. Hydropower rate at 2%. We've done several loans recently. You can see the list of types of projects. The history, I want to talk about the dollars we've spent. Oh, back one. So 1.6 billion is what we've loaned out of this program since 1971. You can see a big chunk of that is for reservoir rehab. You see a picture of Rio Grande Reservoir that was repaired about 4 years ago or so, 5 years ago. But that $750 million, there really is not a source of funding to take care of these reservoirs for agricultural folks. So this has been an important program for them. System rehab, diversion structures on the river are a priority. Rehab would be piping, canal linings, a lot of work. These 120, 130-year-old systems need work done, so we are able to take care of that for them. So the breakdown, we have the two funds, construction fund and severance tax perpetual base. They both operate into the loan program. That's a breakdown, again, of that 1.6 billion history of loans. You can see severance tax, even though it's been around a lot less time, it actually exceeds how many loans we've taken out of it because of the volume of money that we've been able to receive through severance tax. Here's kind of a distance here. It's probably hard to see. I'll start in the far right. Janine Shaw, my partner here, will talk through the water plan grants, WSRF grant programs. That's the sports betting bucket. The next one over from the right is the operational fund that DNR uses. That is severance tax funded. I'll show you the next slide. I'll have a list of types of projects that come out of that. My focus is the loan program that's in the red square, and those two funds are the construction fund, the one that's been around since '71, and the perpetual base fund that's been around since the mid-'90s. The construction fund on the far right has federal mineral lease that comes into it, along with all of the interest earnings that our loans are producing. And we use, most of that money is used for operational activities in CWCB, programs that are routine business that we are involved with, and that's primarily where we use to provide projects, build grants, and non-reimbursable investments, which is a fancy word for non-loan, because it's not producing revenue into the system. The next one over to the right is that perpetual base fund that we're talking about today. It receives 25% of the revenue from severance tax annually, and it is primarily focused on loans. We are also using it for Basin Roundtable, grant funding, and PEPO as listed there. But it, again, has been instrumental in allowing us to do what we do with both of those funds in the projects bill and making enough money to take care of the folks that are in need around the state on water projects. Look at the severance tax. I think most of you know severance tax is a revenue tax on minerals that are extracted from Colorado, from the earth, and this is a compensation, and we are fortunate that we have access to 20% of that annually. So the next slide, I stole this from somebody else, but it is very accurate. Severance tax, except for maybe the last 4 years, has been so volatile. Not only hard to plan for, but also hard to predict quarterly. A lot of times we've seen those fluctuate significantly just in 4 months or 3 months. 95% of it comes from oil and gas, and CWCD again, the perpetual base gets 25% of that. This is a breakdown of where that severance tax money goes as it comes in annually. So the net statewide severance tax collections at the top, then it splits. DOLA gets 50%. They do their thing. Department of Natural Resource, which is CWCD's home, gets the other half, and then the loan programs perpetual base fund is one of the blue bubbles under DNR. And then the bottom bubble there is actually some spillover money through some arrangements that if the operational fund is meeting some requirements, then the spillover happens. And it's got some big numbers there, but we haven't seen those spillovers occur up until a year or so ago. Next slide is another breakdown. That's that list of the Department of Natural Resource activities within the operational fund. And then the 25%, the blue is CWCD's grant program. Here's another slide of the roller coaster ride. So that far left number is FY12. You can see how it bounces around. It makes it so hard to plan for the use of this money, and that's the beauty of the loan program. We accept these highs and lows and we factor it in. We use a 10-year average. We then turn that roller coaster ride into the next slide. We turn this into a steady state of return from our loan program. We take that money, we invest it in water project folks at those interest rates I spoke of. And my goal with the fund, adding those two bars together, the blue is the construction fund and the red is the severance tax perpetual base fund. My role in our policy at CWCB is to make sure that the same buying power exists for our children as we have today. And so what is beyond this construction inflation number, that then becomes money available for the Projects Bill grant / non-reimbursable investment money. And so when you see the Projects Bill, there'll be a loan or two in there if they're over 10 million, but then you'll see a slew of programs or activities, whether they're inside of CWCB or out, and that is a result of achieving the goal of the construction inflation growth of the fund. And I'm getting close to the end. I like this page is just a snapshot. Our equity right now is about 1.2 billion right now. Severance tax comes in at, on an average, again, I need to use average because I can't chase the roller coaster. So I use 40 million on average. We get about 60 million in principal and interest from our incredible borrowers. And I have to tell you, our loan program, if you compared it to a bank, we have virtually no default loans. I think the last time we failed to collect principal on a loan was back in 1993. We don't do loans like that one was done. It was a bad loan to start with. We shouldn't have done it. We just have a very successful program, and it's primarily because of the efforts of the staff to review projects, but also our borrowers are just incredible. Water providers are excellent borrowers. You see the FML that comes in the construction fund, that kind of matches the operational number of $10 million. And then that 60 million is our advertisement that we typically can do about that much each year. This is a breakdown of that perpetual base fund within the loan program. At the end of FY24, which would have been last June, those are the numbers. The loans in repayment, those are loans that we're collecting their annual payments from, but also loans that are in construction. And so we hand it out as we go while they're building their project, paying their invoices, and then put them into repayment. The next line is that's what's been authorized, and a big chunk of that 250 million in the severance tax perpetual base fund is the picture on the right, and that is the Ark Valley Conduit. We made a loan for them, and the perpetual base fund actually allowed, we had some excess revenues that allowed us to do about $30 million in grant to those folks, and then you can see the remainder. There's 37 million available at the end of last fiscal year for new loans as the board continues to consider them, for a total of about 600 million in equity in that program. Next slide. I wanted to blow this picture up because this was an incredible day, and again, if we're going to highlight there's a lot of things that the severance tax perpetual base fund does inside the loan program, and this is one that you can see Senator Hickenlooper, Senator Bennett, Director Mitchell, Colorado River, Southeast District, and Bureau of Reclamation, a celebration of a day to start bringing water that is so necessary to that Arkansas Valley all the way to Lamar. And again, that's because of this program that kind of launched a lot of the work that was necessary by the federal government on that. To the projects bill, so I showed you the growth that I need to maintain. When we're done, we have this system or this process in place. Applications come in August for non-reimbursable investment which are also project bill grants. Goes through a finance committee review and then ultimately to the November board meeting by CWCB, and just the inclusion of loans over 10 million as part of that. That finance committee, made up of several board members, they review the available funds, the equity, the balance, the growth needs and projections for the next year as we're providing them information on decisions. We review the recommendations for projects bill items, financial policies, and assessing just priorities that the board is focused on. Which results, and this is my last slide, in the projects bill last year. It was a fairly large projects bill, primarily because we had a couple of very large loans in it to the Northern Colorado Water Conservancy District, but one of the highlights is that Shoshone Permanency Water Right effort. Again, I don't think, just globally, that did not come out of perpetual base, but we wouldn't be able to do projects like that without the revenue that we're getting out of perpetual base fund. And I guess there's one more slide, and that is for questions. And by the way, if you take a look at that, that's a construction site with a strap holding down some dirt. I'm pretty sure this is from Nebraska. I know this is not a Colorado project. With that, I'd be happy to take some questions. Or are we gonna wait for
You have 8 minutes for questions.
Oh, does that mean I finished 2 minutes early?
Don't give them more time.
Wow. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions. Kathleen.
Is it possible to go back to the slide that listed all of the grant programs where aquatic nuisance species was, and that long list, because you went through
Where the
that
buckets
really
were,
fast.
the blue,
Yeah.
blue buckets?
Yeah, that one right
Oh.
there.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask if those are in jeopardy at all this year, if you happen to know, or if you
So-
can even answer that.
Nate Pearson is going to go through the budget proposals that are on the table, and I think
Okay.
can address some of those questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
So, when the finance committee goes through the applications, about how many applications do you usually get a year, how many are able to be funded, and how many aren't funded?
So that, thank you, Senator. It's evolved, and back to that Prop DD.
Yeah.
It's taken us a while to get stable post Prop DD. The demand of the water plan grants is no longer on this, and so we're starting to build up some consistency. I think we had, from the outside, we maybe had 5 applications last year, and we were able to fund all of them. We did reduce one request down as a result of our limited availability, but I do anticipate the price of projects are just going through the roof. And I think there's an awareness now that is starting to generate that there is this additional on top of water plan grants that help the much larger type activities. Water plan grants have a funding limit, kind of depends on the category of those water plan grants, but some of the large construction, whether it's reservoir work or hydropower or name it, they just don't have there's not enough money in the water plan grant program, and so we're pushing them to the projects bill, and that way you all get a look at them and see if you approve as well. Please, questions? Because I'm excited about the project loan program. That it?
Or you can save them all for Nate.
Great, thank you.
Good job.
All right, can everybody hear me okay? Great, I'll try and turn around so it's a little bit tricky up here, but my name is Janine Shaw, and I am CWCB's pretty brand new grants section chief. I have been at CWCB for about 4 months, and I'm really excited to oversee our primary grant programs, which includes the Water Supply Reserve Fund, or WSRF, which is really hard to say fast, and our water plan grants. So when it comes to the Water Supply Reserve Fund, you really can't talk about this fund without first talking about the Basin Roundtables. And so the Water for the 21st Century Act, for those of you who were at Water Congress last week, knows that it is the 20th anniversary of that legislation that put into place these basin roundtables that were set up to really help at the basin level, intra-basin and inter-basin, have these discussions around water that are collaborative and are able to come up with some solutions. And the year after that, we had a mechanism put into place where the basin roundtables could recommend funding for grants through the Water Supply Reserve Fund. So for these grants, an applicant does their first stop is the Basin Roundtable in the area where the project is occurring. And they have to get a letter of recommendation, letter of support from that roundtable that then gets passed on to CWCB and the board for their consideration and sign off. The Water Supply Reserve Fund is, as Kirk mentioned, funded through severance tax. And it is through specifically the perpetual base fund. And it's at about $2.7 million per year is what it has been recently, and that equates to $300,000 per basin per fiscal year. And so that is the pool that those basins have to be able to make grant recommendations from. And on average, it's about $75,000 per grant in recent years. There are some that are larger than that, but that's what it has been on average. This map here shows the geographic distribution of grants through WSRF over the last 20 or so years. And I really love this map because it really shows how spread out this is, and it is really coming from the basins. And we have been able to fund over 900 projects with over $123 million since inception. So really a lot of great work on the ground happening. And in terms of the types of things that the Water Supply Reserve Fund funds, anything from feasibility studies, design and engineering, infrastructure, it really is a wide array of types of projects. When it comes to this program in particular, they tend to be a little bit more singularly focused, and they can be multi-beneficial. Multi-beneficial is, always encouraged, but sometimes there might not be that same opportunity. And so in this case, for example, the Crawford Clipper Ditch Improvement in the Gunnison Basin, this was, again, as Kirk mentioned, there sometimes can be that combo of loans and grants. So this got a WSRF grant as well as a loan to supplement. And moving on to water plan grants. So this one has certainly got a lot of attention, and for good reason. Our water plan grants, here I just put up kind of a timeline of funding and major activities as it relates to this. And since fiscal year 18, we have funded over $109 million in projects. So really it is, the dollars are hard at work. And I should back up a little bit. Similar to WSRF, you gotta talk about the roundtables with water plan grants, you really have to talk about the water plan as well. So just as a high level reminder for everybody, the water plan grants are really for the water plan implementation. And so in the water plan, with the most recent update in 2023, there were 50 partner actions and 50 agency actions. And one of the agency actions is funding. So this is where the water plan grants come into place, and we are able to fund a lot of the things that are the partner actions moving forward. And in terms of Proposition JJ, I know there's been quite a bit of conversation about that, especially since it was so recent. And one thing, that was to remove the $29 million revenue cap. And that did pass with overwhelming support. And that the most recent estimates show that in the first 3 years, we expect it to be around $16 million, upwards of that. And I will point out though that there is a lag, and so it's a 3-year distribution cycle, and year 1, the revenue is collected, year 2, it's received and appropriated, and then year 3 is when we're actually able to make it available for grant making. And I point that out because it's actually just this fiscal year that the water plant grants were fully funded by sports betting revenue. And here is the distribution, similar to what I showed for WSRF. This is the distribution of water plan grants. And I will also point out that for water plan grants, the categories that we are able to fund are actually in statute. So that includes ag, conservation and land use, engagement and innovation, water storage and supply, and watershed health and recreation. And across all of these categories, we have had super strong applications, and we're really plugging away. We have 4 water plan grants as well, similar to getting that local perspective. We have 4 regional grant managers who are actually located in the communities that these grants are coming from. So they have their finger on the pulse and are really working to hear from the community and what is important and tie that to the water plan. And I should mention as well, for both grant programs, we do have a match requirement. For WSRF, it is a 25% minimum. So again, we're trying to make these dollars go further. For water plan grants, it's a 25% match requirement for plans and studies, and a 50% match for construction and implementation. So we really are stretching these dollars and making them go a long way. So next, this is kind of the fun part. You get to see some of the example projects. So I'm gonna run through one for each category. This is for watershed health and recreation. And this was actually the removal of it's an obsolete diversion structure. And so, you know, it's interesting because we have some locations where diversion structures are going in, but in this case, it was actually not good for this diversion structure to be here. It's all the water plan grants really are focused on being multi-beneficial. So in this case, there were 5 other contributing funding partners. It helps rec, it helps fish passage, it helps native species, it has all the things. So it's a really good example of this category. And I will mention for this category as well, we do have wildfire-ready watersheds and wildfire-ready action plans that are also eligible for this. That is also in the projects bill, but lots of great stuff. And for ag, we have the Rye Resurgence Project as an example. And this was in the San Luis Valley, and it really was a goal of preserving economy, ag, water, and making sure that they could live in harmony. So there was a low water use winter cover crop that has a premium market price. And so we're able to get folks on board with growing this, processing it, and then marketing it is what CWCP's grant was used for. This is kind of the bread and butter water storage and supply project. This is in, I believe it is in Wellington, where they were increasing the storage and enhancing the existing storage as well. And this one I know the legislature has worked hard on combining and integrating land and water use planning, and so through CWCP grants, Growing Water Smart has worked to train local elected officials and staff on integrating these, and it's really not just about the workshop, it's about actually getting an action plan, and then there's opportunity for funding to implement the action plan and ongoing training involved as well. And then finally, last, we have engagement and innovation. This was a grant for the Next Generation Water Leaders program, and it previously was in just the Arkansas Basin, and now this grant from CWCP has allowed it to expand to the Southwest Basin as well. and include water quantity and policy in the coursework that is for high school juniors and seniors, and doing this hands-on, locally driven curriculum. And with that, I will open it up to questions. I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time.
The $16 million you mentioned, is that in addition over the cap or total?
That is over the cap. Yeah. So the question for, was, is the $16 million over the cap, or is that inclusive? So it is over.
And I have a question, going back to the Crawford project. When you do projects like that that are like very much critical or essential for water users in that area, how much leverage do you have to be able to really structure how much grant dollars you're allocating and how much you're loaning to be able to make it work?
Are you, I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you talking about how much goes to grant and how much goes to loan?
Yeah. Do you have a lot of discretion to be able to work with, say, the applicant? Or is it pretty structured that you can only do a max of like so many percent in grants and so many percent in loan?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of where things get allocated between grants and loans, it's not a set, like we can't go over $1.5 million in grants. Really the crux when it comes in, sorry, I keep hitting that. I talk with my hands a lot. The crux comes in where we have a set amount of grant dollars. We try and allocate it by category based on demand. And so it's a little bit looking backwards and say we traditionally have gotten a lot more demand in this category. So 20% is what we're gonna aim for, water storage and supply. If it's a really competitive round, that's where the discussions come in, where do we fund fewer projects at the full amount? Do we fund all the projects at lesser amounts? So there is a fair amount of discretion there, and we're really trying to handle it equitably as best we can.
You do have 50% limit on construction.
We have a 50% requirement for match.
So the loan is the match.
So
Anybody else? All right. Thank you so much. So Nate, I will go ahead and turn it on over to you.
Degree to cut off the applause there. Sergeant Reserve. Nate Pearson, Assistant Director for Water Policy at the Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and I really appreciate you all being willing to accommodate a virtual option today. I'm glad to be able to be here to talk about this. I'll just note up front that if there are questions, it would be helpful, Janine or Kirk, if you could repeat them. I've had a hard time hearing questions from around the room, but can hear you all at the lectern. Great. So I am here to give folks an update on some of the current budget proposals being considered by the JDC as put forward by DNR and the Governor's Office in this year's budget. As Kirk and Janine have just run through, the state of our water funding in Colorado is really, really strong, thanks to the work of a lot of people at CWCP over the years. And so really, really proud of the work and impact that CWCP has in this space. If you can go to the next slide, Janine. So there are a couple of proposals in this year's budget that would impact water funding. And I think, as you all know, this year's budget is incredibly challenging. And GDC is looking under every couch cushion to find dollars. And we want to make sure that everybody who is interested in water funding understands some of the impacts from this year's budget that would help balance the general fund. So there are two proposals in this year's budget, two separate but related proposals. The first is DNR's R10 request to restructure the operational fund, which you heard Kirk talk through. Another is transfers of interest income revenue, and that's a statewide request that would impact departments, across the executive branch. And so I'll talk through the specifics of each of these. I'm also just noting here that there are a couple of great budget requests that may be flying under the radar that would adjust our water commissioner job classes for the Division of Water Resources and provide an FTE for our technical update to the water plan. So just want to make sure folks understand those sort of smaller, more discrete budget requests that are out there before I launch into sort of the bigger, more technical discussion around severance tax and budget balancing. Next slide, please. So I won't belabor this because Kirk already gave a great overview of how severance tax flows, but we're really talking about the left side of this pie here, the two big DNR funds that receive severance tax, the operational fund and the perpetual base fund. As Kirk laid out, they are interrelated, largely because when operational fund expenses are fully covered, money spills over as an extra distribution to the perpetual base fund. So just important to keep that spillover in mind because the DNR R10 request primarily targets that spillover. So next slide, please. This is just another way of visualizing all of the various funds across the CWCB, and so I recognize this is probably very hard to see. You'll see there's a big yellow box. That box sort of shows the world of funds that are in CWCB's purview, and their purview only. And so that's the funds that Kirk and Janine have just talked through. The construction fund, the perpetual base fund, and the water plant implementation fund. You can see each of them have some sub-funds. Over to the right, you'll see that the severance tax operational fund has just a little narrow sliver within CWCB's purview. That is some funds for CWCB operations that come from the operational fund. But the severance tax operational fund primarily covers programs outside of the CWCB across the DNR. And if you go to the next slide, Janine, I believe, I've got that list. And so the operational fund supports the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, the Colorado Geological Survey, which is mines. It supports the Division of Reclamation, Mine and Safety. The Colorado Water Conservation Board, as I mentioned, gets some operational funding for that. Colorado Parks and Wildlife receives a bit, and then there are other smaller grant programs. And as I mentioned, where all of these needs listed on this slide are fulfilled, money spills over from the operational fund to the perpetual base fund. It's also really important to note that each of these programs here, because of the volatility that Kirk referenced, each of these programs carries a 200% reserve. And so for every dollar that's spent in fiscal year 25, we are reserving $2 in the reserve to prepare for future years, future downturns. This is also really important to note for this restructuring proposal. So next slide, please. So the restructuring proposal moves a number of these programs listed on the previous slide and listed here again from the operational fund to the general fund for 3 years. By moving it from the operational fund to the general fund for those 3 years, they will no longer be subject, at least for those 3 years, to the volatility of severance tax, and as such, don't really require that 200% reserve. And so by moving these programs to a general fund, we can sort of take advantage of that reserve for short-term budget balancing. And so while take the Species Conservation Trust Fund, which is the first program on this list, while the general fund will be paying for that $5 million program, we will have, over 3 years, that would be a $15 million obligation for the general fund. But by sweeping the reserve one time, that's $10 million, and diverting that $5 million that would have flown to the operational fund to the general fund, we will have benefited the general fund by a total of $10 million over 3 years, while still keeping this program whole. And so this restructuring is really a way to keep these programs whole while utilizing the operational fund reserve to help balance the general fund. So that's sort of the first big point to get with the operational fund restructuring. And then the second is that spillover revenue that would have flowed from the operational fund to the perpetual base fund over the next 3 years will also be diverted to the general fund. And so you'll see here, these are our best estimates of what that would look like. So 11 million in fiscal year 25, 16 million in fiscal year 26, and 12.6 in fiscal year 27. And so it's really important to note that not only are the programs that are being moved to the general fund being kept whole, but that the funding that is being diverted to the general fund, swept to the general fund, does not eat into sort of the base appropriations for the CWCB that you were just presented to by Kirk and Jean. And so it is a technical proposal, and I think creatively developed to try to take advantage of sort of the intricacies of the operational fund and its interaction with the perpetual base fund. But we do not expect it to have a base, an impact on the base programs of CWCB. But it is, compared to current law, it will be less funding for water projects for the next 3 years. So that's the operational fund restructuring proposal. It is also one last sort of intricacy here is that, as you all saw, when 50% of severance tax comes to DNR, it gets split between the operational fund and the perpetual base fund evenly. Over the next 3 years, this proposal would move that to CWCB receiving 27%, while the operational fund gets 23%. And that's based on sort of both a mitigating measure to try to get more base funding to CWCB, but also as the operational fund's liabilities are lower over the next few years, they don't need, or it does not need the sort of same level of distributions. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so that was the operational fund proposal, quite technical. The transfer of interest revenue proposal is also a bit technical, but I think less so. So over the last few years, the governor's office has identified that interest being earned in cash funds across the state is outpacing growth in the Tabor cap. And so as that interest comes in year after year, it continues to squeeze our Tabor growth potential. And so this proposal would transfer Treasury interest revenue from a wide variety of cash funds across the state for 2 years, and then on an ongoing basis would cap Treasury interest into these funds. And there are a number of CWCB funds that will be impacted and others that won't. There are a number of factors to consider when identifying which will be impacted and which won't. I'll walk through those here. Next slide, please. So for the one-time sweeps of interest revenue over the next 2 years, there are a couple important carve-outs. So first, interest earned from loan repayments would not be subject to these transfers. But Kirk walked through just how important those loan repayments are to the health of the fund. Those will not be targeted. Only interest earned on Treasury, so basically interest earned on money in the bank would be subject to these one-time sweeps. Also, Tabor exempt revenue would not be subject to these one-time sweeps. So that applies to Proposition DD, which is exempt from Tabor. And then for the ongoing cap on interest, continuously appropriated funds will not be subject to the cap. And so the Water Supply Reserve Fund, which supports our basin roundtables, is continuously appropriated, so it won't be subject to the cap. And then, again, because Proposition DD is exempt from Tabor, it would not be subject to the cap. And I have on the next slide sort of a little chart outlining the main CWCB funds and whether they're included or not. And so in this first line, the CWCB Perpetual Base Fund is exempt from both the one-time sweeps and the interest cap. This is because it is, one, uniquely reliant on interest, and two, it's already being impacted by the operational fund restructuring proposal that I outlined. The CWCB Construction Fund would be included in both the one-time sweeps and the interest cap. The Water Plan Implementation Cash Fund, which is supported by sports betting Proposition DD revenue, is exempt. The reason it says mostly exempt here is because there is still just a little bit of Tabor eligible funds that were put into the fund as sort of seed funds a couple of years ago by the General Assembly before Proposition DD revenue started flowing. And so there's a small, single percentage point piece of the Water Plan Implementation Cash Fund that would be subject to this, but Proposition DD revenue would not. The Water Supply Reserve Fund, again, which supports the basin roundtables, would be included in the one-time sweeps, but not the interest cap. And then the Species Conservation Trust Fund would be included in both. Next slide. summing all of those funds from the previous page, our best estimate of the impact over 2 years is included here. So about 11 to 12 million in fiscal year 25, about 8.5 to 9 million in fiscal year 26. And then it's really hard to come to, an estimate of what the interest cap impact would be over time. But it's just important to note, right now, our funds are about 2.5% statewide, and the new cap would be about 1.5%. So looking at about a 1 percentage point change in the interest earned. With that, I'm happy to answer questions. And again, Jean, if you wouldn't mind repeating the questions into your microphone, that'd be super helpful.
I have some questions.
I'm sure there's a number of folks in the room who've heard me give this presentation a couple times now, so apologies to those who are in the camp.
Thank you, Nate. This is Dylan Roberts. I think you may have mentioned it, but overall, if your budget proposal passed, the JVC accepted it, passed in Wando, what's the net savings this year that the department's offering to our budget challenges?
Yeah, so I think over 3 years, the benefit to the general fund is in the $70 to $80 million range, while the impact to these programs is in the $45 million range. And so, and that is, again, gets back to the sort of outsized impact that the operational fund reserve will have. So an outsized benefit to the general fund compared to the impact to the cash funds at CWCB.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, representative.
So actually, I'm not a rep.
Used to be.
Oh, former representative, yes, yes.
And Nate, maybe you can repeat it, but I asked earlier if any of the programs that aren't part of the severance tax restructuring proposal, if those are pretty solid, or is there going to be any more conversation about touching any of those other programs that were listed in the great slide that Kirk had?
So Nate, the question is around, it's from Kathleen Curry, and it is around the programs that were not part of the restructuring. What is the status of those, and are any of those in consideration for future discussions?
So first, thanks for the question. Under the governor's budget, yes, there are certain programs that are proposed to remain under the status quo funded by the operational fund. So not being shifted to the general fund like others are. That includes the Aquatic Nuisance Species Program at Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I don't have the others at the top of my mind. So again, under the governor's proposal, the status quo would remain the same for those programs. Obviously, the JVC is looking at all options here to balance the budget, and so I do understand that consideration is being given to moving some of those other funds. But again, the governor's proposal only moves that list that was provided earlier and does leave a number of programs, including the Aquatic Nuisance Species Program, under the status quo of the operational fund.
Thank you.
I'll do another one if we have, looks like we have a little bit of time. So a little unrelated to your presentation, Nate, but along the same lines, I know you do a lot of work with federal funding. Is there any update or info you can share with us with regards to what's happening right now? It's my understanding that one of the executive orders that President Trump signed on his first day in office is paused or frozen some of the federal funding we were hoping to get for Shoshone for other water projects in Colorado. What's going on with that, if anything?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I mean, I'll just say that across state government, our agencies are working to define impacts, both the programs that are federally funded at the state, but also federally funded programs that impact our stakeholders. The grant program that you just mentioned, which is the Upper Colorado River Environmental Drought funding from the Bureau of Reclamation, is certainly one that we have our eye on. we were incredibly active in getting applications submitted across the state and supporting those and providing matching funds, really motivated, and I still remain optimistic that those dollars will hit the ground. I will say, the Bureau of Reclamation's contracting process is generally, 6 to 9 months. Those projects were announced, or those awards were announced in the last week of the Biden administration, and so I think even under the most ideal circumstances, that money likely would hit the ground for quite some time. I think, I have not heard anything directly from the Bureau about the status of those funds or the applicability of this program in the context of Trump's executive order, and so no real updates, but certainly no specific negative news that I've heard on that front.
I got a second, I got some supplemental information. So, Nate was talking about. Sorry, Nate, this is Kirk. You were talking about the Treasury interest rate that's being swept versus the hard-earned dollars from the loan program folks that have borrowed money from us, and I think that's a critical piece to this decision, and I appreciate all of Nate's work and all those others in the budget space, because it would be a hard sell to tell those borrowers, yeah, that interest that you've been paying is going somewhere else other than back into the system. But you talk about Treasury, and I think there's a foundational piece background to this. So when we loan money, the money's in Treasury until it's not, and then it goes out to the borrower. And so the money we're talking about is when it waits to be distributed. And I showed you a couple pictures there, example. I don't hate to continue to use the Arc Valley conduit, but it's in the works. It's going to take some time. So that $90 million loan that we have for that project is waiting in Treasury to be utilized. And once it's utilized, then it's no longer in that category of interest being swept. And so I think you said about $10 to $11 million of the current year's interest. That's the estimate of what is in the fund that likely will go out the door before the end of the fiscal year. So just to help clarify, it might be too deep in the weeds for this conversation, but I was glad to hear that.
And I think we have about 5 minutes left if anybody has any other questions. Otherwise, I'm happy to wrap things up. Well, huge thank you to Water Education Colorado, to Colorado Water Congress, and for all of you for being here today. I don't know, Lauren, if you want to come up and say anything else? Okay.
No, I think that's it. Yeah, stay tuned for additional workshops that we'll be planning hopefully in the next few months with our assistance from our
Remember, bring a friend.
Yeah, bring a friend. Yeah, no, appreciate it. And if you have any follow-up questions, happy to correspond with anyone who's interested.
Thank you so much, everyone.